Welcome, Robert Rich, to Sydney and the home of 2MBS FM 102.5 and Ultima Thule. We've been featuring new music for many years.
You have, thanks. I've been very, very grateful for the support here. I've been making music for about 30 years, actually professionally for about 30 years. Since the mid-'70s, starting with electronics and then moving into more acoustic instruments, microtonalism, trying to make something that was meaningful to me because I wasn't hearing it out there in the world. My biggest motivations come from the planet around us. I love just the bubbling life force that we come out of, the primordial soup, cosmology, genetics, biology, poetry, all of the other edicts and rees that come around from arts and sciences. I just like the flow of ideas and the incredible energy of being alive. It's really what comes into this sense of mystery and awe that I try to capture in the music. For me, music isn't that interesting unless it somehow creates a question that doesn't have easy answers. I'm much more interested in the questions than the answers, really.
You mentioned poetry. Other artists have featured poetry in their music, people like Brian Eno and Harold Budd. Have you ever thought of doing some music with poetry?
Not specifically, no. I think I'm somewhat more attracted to instrumental music, but I like the way that poetry uses language as a way to evoke sensation rather than describe it. And I think that music is very much like that in that it's a pure sensational experience rather than an analytical experience. As soon as lyrics get attached to a piece of music, it tends to force it into an area of interpretation. And there are times when I want to do that. I had a group called Amoeba during the 90s that was dealing with lyrics, and I was the singer. And that was a way to bring some of my more language-based ideas into a musical context. But it's a very, very different thing with instrumental music to try to evoke something within the listener that's really part of themselves rather than trying to impart a part of me to them. And that's what I love about this more abstract instrumental music, is that it's really more about what's going on inside the listener. It has less to do about me. As soon as lyrics or poetry comes about, then it becomes more of a projection of ego, I think. And that's not really what I'm most interested in.
Tell me about your musical influences. So what are you listening to at home at the moment?
My really deep loves of inspiration in music probably come from certain musical traditions around the world. The traditions of North Indian classical music, Javanese gamelan, North African and Persian music, all of these share a certain quality of ecstatic melody, very refined melodic sensibility, probably at the expense of harmonic complexity. And I like that exchange. I actually prefer the story that's told from a complex thread of melody. So some of my favorites would be Hari Prasad Chaurasia, a flute player, bansuri player from India. Some recordings I've heard of the solo court gamelan of Java, Central Java. Hamza Eldin, an oud player from Nubia. I never tire of him. He passed away about 5 years ago. Managed to see him quite a few times before he died, and it just brings tears to my eyes. That sort of stuff is really my all-time permanent collection of great love. I listen a lot to certain kinds of jazz, especially Bill Evans. I think I never tire of the complex chordal, beautiful simplicity with the complexity. Miles Davis, Ornette Coleman, Coltrane, Keith Jarrett. Also, probably what sent me most off into my personal vocabulary was Terry Riley, whose piece Rainbow and Curved Air and 1963 composition In C showed me the way that pulse and melody, rhythm, melody, and monophonic lines can be used to create sort of interweaving tapestry. Also, Harry Partch, a very obscure American composer who lived from about I think he was born in 1902 and lived until 1974, a microtonalist. He built all of his own instruments. Harry Partch was just a very odd loner of a composer who was outside of academia and created a complete world of sound. And that was also a huge influence for me. That's just a handful.
But people like Stefan Mikus and David Parsons. I mean, Stefan Mikus plays instruments from around the world, and Parsons seems to be very much on the Gamalian Buddhist genre.
Mm-hmm. No, Stefan Mikus, beautiful albums on ECM in the 80s. His Flower Pot album I really liked.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So how have you found your travels around Australia so far?
I'm loving Australia. I feel a strong sympathy between my sort of native Californian mentality and the mentality of Aussies on the southeast coast here. There's an informality, yet kind of a grounded quality that people are just real. And
great. I
really get along well with folks around here.
That's great. And one thing I would like to ask you is how you've recently recorded a new album, Medicine Box, and I was interested in how you come to choose names for your pieces. Can you describe the process of that? Because naming things, I think, is very important.
Naming things is really hard for me. Sometimes for albums, a concept and a name comes before the music, because if I try to find a name to describe the music, it really falls short. My music isn't much about language. I tend to think, I tend to have a very language-based mindset, so the music is almost my own medicine against language in a strange way. So the title Medicine Box came before the music, and it's in part because I wanted to create, Martha Graham said, talking about music is like dancing about architecture. It's challenging for me sometimes. The idea of medicine in my music is a very personal idea. I often feel a need for a sort of antidote to modern civilization. I perhaps am one of those people who walk around without skin on. Yeah, my nerves feel like they're just oversensitized to things. And sometimes the music is a personal womb to enclose myself in, a kind of cocoon of mystery and safety, really seeking beauty, but at the same time wanting that beauty to be complex and not mundane. I love to be inside a private place that also has enough density of information that I can explore it. And so the idea of Medicine Box is really like a place to crawl inside of that contains a sort of magical potion. And I wanted the music to have that kind of energy, a mysterious, beautiful energy. So I set about, working on rhythms and starting with what I was half jokingly thinking of as a dub album, sort of thinking of reggae dub as this kind of way to mess up sound and to play with rhythm in a melodic way. And so some of the first pieces on the album were actually kind of the dubbiest. And then the titles of the pieces came after the music for the individual songs, and really they're almost onomatopoetic. They're words that describe the sound that the piece entails. So the second piece on the album, which has a vocalist named Sherry Chuan on it, I called Karawana because it sounds like she's singing in another language, even though she's singing complete verbalese. It's nonsense syllables. I wanted to replace my gliss guitar or my flutes with an actual voice, but not have it sing lyrics, but really just be an instrument. So she's a singer who can very comfortably go into a sort of scat singing without any meaning, but beautiful enunciations of human sound. Mm. And so Karawana is a nonsense word. It sounds like a word that's in some language, but really it's the sound of the echoing rhythms that's underneath her voice. Yeah,
that sounds like what Lisa Gerard does a lot of that vocal music.
Exactly.
No words, just sounds.
I love her work, actually, and I think that Sherry was getting a certain quality that reminds me a little bit of Lisa Gerard. Yeah. Ideas come through the names, like two of the names on the new album are cornea and macula, which are both parts of the eye. The macula being the most sensitive part of the retina, the neuronal sensing, part of the eye, and cornea being the lens. So these ideas of parts of the body, the eye to me is a really interesting metaphor of a window into the mind as well as to the mind.
Well, maybe you can give us an acoustic version on the flute of one of your new pieces.
Tell you what, this is the flute. Of course, the pieces involve a lot more than flute. The flute really is just a voice. There's a piece that's on a compilation that came out of Israel. The compilation is called Darkroom Beats, and Moth Wings is the name of the piece. And this is a flute. These, by the way, are made out of sprinkler pipe. They're PVC white water pipe, and I drill them. And this is basically an end-blown flute with a kind of Indian raga tuning.
So anyone can make their own PVC pipe? Yeah?
Exactly. It's just PVC sprinkler pipe. This one is 3/4 inch, and you just take a drill, and in this case, a slot for the end.
How do you see the future in electronic music in the ambient genre, considering the rate of technology have changed today?
As far as the ambient genre goes, I don't really think much in genres to begin with. I think it's all a flow.
Yeah.
I don't even think of my music as particularly ambient because it's something I hope people can immerse themselves into rather than use as background. I think it more as perhaps psychoactive music. And I think that there's always going to be some kind of exploration of the unconscious within music. I mean, really, the tradition of ambient music might come from experimental music and sacred music that might go back thousands of years, really. If we think of this music as a kind of shamanic practice, then we can imagine it going back to the dawn of time, or at least human history. I think that electronics are just yet another instrument, and that's one reason I incorporate all these other instruments into the electronic texture. And so whether it's electronic music or acoustic music really doesn't matter much to me. Really what matters is that it's deep music or intense music or music that takes people somewhere interesting within themselves.
Where would you like to take people?
I'd like to take people to a place of discovery, really, where they find something magical within themselves, really. I don't want to impart it into them. And I think that idea is always going to exist in artists and music, because really it's a communal art form, and it's one of those few things that contains a kind of ritual energy to it. And I don't think that's going to go away regardless of the changing landscape of tools and instruments.
Okay, and where do you see Robert Rich heading in the future? You've just released a new album. What new projects have you got planned, or are you just moving with the flow of life?
Always working on ideas, probably 2 different ideas for upcoming albums. One might be a deep floating ambient album. I don't have a possible name for that. And another one might be a more electronic. I'm toying with ideas of cosmology and deep time, possibly a lot of analog synthesizers on that, perhaps a little bit old school. Of my old work, it might compare a bit more to like Electric Ladder or something like that.
Fantastic, Robert. Robert Rich, and musician, thanks very much for your